Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hi there, and welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, your host, Peter Robbins. You are watching or listening on KGRA Digital Broadcasting, kgradb.com, that is. And should you wish to subscribe to this show, you will also be subscribing to every one of the zillion other shows in their archive. You can subscribe by the month or the year. And if you use my first name, Peter, as your subscription code, you will get 30% off. So tonight is a special show. Next Friday, the 24th of June, is a very significant anniversary for those of us that follow the subject of UFOs, now equally referred to as UAPs. It's the 75th anniversary of an event that is regarded by historians and lay folks in the field as the actual beginning of our modern age of UFOs or UFO sightings. And that was Kenneth Arnold, a businessman and private pilot who had an extraordinary sighting while piloting his plane in the Cascade Mountain Range in Washington, D.C. A scant week later, even less, something went down, I believe, in the plains of St. Augustine, several dozen miles from the then small town of Roswell, New Mexico. And the man most associated with that event, Major Jesse Marcel Sr., the base intelligence officer, was the one who was authorized to break that story of a crashed flying saucer. Butch Blanchard, General Butch Blanchard, commanding officer of the Roswell Army Airfield, didn't clear that with the Pentagon first, something I will always love General Blanchard for. And within a matter of hours, I'm sure he was castigated for that. And although Marcel had posed with actual fragments that he had collected from the debris field of this unknown, he was forced to be photographed again, but with parts of a mogul weather balloon, possibly one of the most humiliating events in any person's life in the history of humanity. While again, this event, and it's the 75th anniversary of both these events coming up this coming week, is regarded as UFO history, I beg to differ. And even that it is more than American history. This is a very important transition, a marking of a very special moment in the history of humanity, and nothing less. And tonight's two special guests come to us with very unique points of view on the events at hand, and these two really towering figures in these two specific events that bookend the event that created the modern age of UFO sightings. We have, let me just go to the introductions. Shanelle Schanz is the granddaughter of Kenneth Arnold, the first pilot to have a first-hand UFO encounter, literally a transcendent sighting of 9 unidentified objects, this in the vicinity of Mount Rainier, while flying over the Cascade National Forest on June 24, 1947. His home was in Boise, Idaho, where Shanelle grew up. She majored in philosophy while studying at the College of Western Idaho and received her pharmacy technician certificate from Clark College in Vancouver, Washington. She is a proud mother and wife animal lover, and had her own UFO sighting while living in Portland, Oregon. Shanelle has empathy for the world, now more than ever in these troubling times. My other guest is Jesse Marcel III, grandson of Major Jesse Marcel. Jesse is a successful inventor, published author, and public speaker. The guiding love of the unknown, his guiding love of the unknown can be traced back to an unconventional childhood where space travel and the possibility of extrasolar life were bedtime stories. His visionary approach to the future is being applied to aerospace and medical technologies. Recently, he has joined Alien Allure, that's alienallure.com, to help sponsor higher education, STEM programs, and lend a helping hand to various charities. And with that, Shanelle, Jesse, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
It's great to have you here.
It's been a while.
It has, Jesse. You and I have a history,
Yes.
as well as going back to my friendship with your dad, one of my favorite people ever, who, geez, it's like 9 years now since he passed.
It's been a while.
Yeah. And Shanelle, you and I have become good friends on Facebook, in part recognizing each other's dark and irreverent senses of humor.
Yes.
And it's one of the great things about the social network. And when I realized fairly early on who your grandfather was, you just became that much more interesting to me. And as we were coming toward this anniversary, I was thinking to myself, what can I do as a broadcast host to make this time special? Of course, I could have had on a whole slew of experts, and I'm very delighted to say in the second half of the show, we're going to be joined by one of the best minds in the history of UFO studies, Donald R. Schmitt. We'll get to his introduction later. But for now, although you both led very different childhoods, I'd like to go back and forth a bit. Shanelle, where were you born?
I was born in Boise, Idaho, where my grandfather resided. So with my family, he was my mother's father, so we were close and we'd spent a lot of time together. And unfortunately, he passed away when I was 7 of colon cancer, but I think it was pneumonia that got him. It wasn't really the colon cancer, but before he died, he sat me down and told me some deep things. And I can only remember a couple things of what he said, of not to trust the government and to think for yourself. He was just so, at the end of his life, so disappointed with not getting an answer.
Yeah.
With the whole UFO phenomenon. And, now it's come out that they do exist. And, a lot of they've even said that astral projection's real. So, I think different dimensions has a lot to do with it too. Our family kind of believed that it was more of a spiritual thing of like, these UFOs and these aliens are coming from different dimensions. And at the end of his life, that's what he believed. It was the connection between the living and the dead. And a lot of our knowledge, it seems like, has been forgotten.
Yes.
Because, it seems like we had our education made us forget the truths of what really, life was. And our grandfather woke everyone up when he had his sighting. Because, there's been sightings all over the world. There's picture graphs on caves of aliens and UFOs.
You bet.
10,000 years old. And so they've always been here. And, possibly, like, I kind of studied with the Hare Krishnas for a while, and they talked about atom bombs. And, supposedly, like, atom bombs were going off, but it was the alien technology, not ours, back in history. Anyhow, I don't want to carry on.
It's extraordinary what we can recall as children. I lost my first grandparent, my dad's father, who I absolutely adored, when I was probably just 9, maybe still 8 years old. But I remember so many small things that we did and that he taught me, and then that I learned about him later in life. Jesse, where were you born?
I was born on a naval base in San Diego. That's where I grew up. Not for long. My father he was in the Navy, but he actually was in the Navy, then Army, then Marines, and he retired actually in a special group. But so traveled a little bit, but from San Diego, Southern California.
And I know that you have a sister who, not unfortunately, she is on vacation, and I hope having a great time, or she would be with us. Denise, have you heard from her the past couple of days?
We did talk last night. She's really enjoying herself. So all I was told it is hot where she's at.
Okay.
It's uncomfortably hot.
Which covers a good part of the world at this moment.
Yeah.
Any other siblings?
Yeah, we have a brother, John, who's in Portland, Hillsborough, out in that area. Cool. And yeah, so we all grew up with the story, and obviously the lineage and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's the three of us. And then when my mother passed away when I was in seventh grade,
yeah,
my father remarried, had two more kids. Yeah. And both of those girls are obviously part of the family heritage as far as they're in the lineage of the Roswell.
And your stepmother Linda is a friend of mine, and somebody who I hold in great esteem as well. Shanelle, any siblings in your family?
I do. I have a brother who's younger than me, and he looks a lot like my grandfather. He hasn't really been a spokesperson for grandfather. I've always been the really proud, telling my second grade teacher who my grandfather was, like, always felt like it's been my destiny to carry on the legacy. Because anyhow, Cameron really, he just, never was a spokesperson, but he looks a lot like my grandfather. He does.
Your grandfather's a very strikingly good-looking guy.
Yes, yeah. And I've, even found a Arnold relative just from being a spokesperson, and she lives in Eugene, and she looks like me. Like, the Arnold genes are strong. They're definitely strong genes. But yeah, just growing up with grandfather, I was just always so proud of him, and he was just like magical to me. And one thing I remember about him is all of his turquoise jewelry. He had turquoise rings and a turquoise bow tie that he would wear. His grandmother was Sioux Indian from North Dakota. So, and it's funny, I have black gums, which is indigenous to indigenous people. But so we do have some, crazy lineage. If I just, like my husband's German, I have a little bit of German. My grandmother's from Norway. And then, just all the heritage we have. And my dad's Irish. So just, I'm just such a collection of races.
In other words, you're all American.
All American. Yeah. I'm just, the Indian part is just, I'm proud of, because, that makes me feel like I live this land. My ancestors have been on this land for a long time, so.
And because of the ridicule factor toward the subject of UFOs, flying saucers, unidentified flying discs, unidentified aerial phenomena, that only in the past few years has started to dissipate, our parents, grandparents, they grew up, as did many of our contemporaries, with this kind of twisted understanding that if you take the subject seriously, you're weird, you're strange, you're some kind of believer or mystic or con man or woman or lost soul or lonely or think it's going to make you famous, when of course this is not the way it is. I'm just fascinated by that aspect. And as the children of seminally famous people in this field, I'm going to ask you first, Jesse, when you were old enough to understand your grandfather's place in this, and was it something you shared with your friends? And if so, did you ever get any kind of teasing sort of feedback? Because, the flying saucer stuff?
It was such, or I guess it became such commonplace in our family that eventually we had talked to our friends about it. But I honestly, I can't recall ever being ridiculed.
Good.
There's still, again, through social media, people that reach out and say, it was fun talking to you about this, all those years ago, whatever. But I think that I was of the generation that kind of missed I didn't have that ridicule put on me. I think my father took more of a brunt
Yep.
of the, and my father is beyond reproach. I mean, what he said, you believed. It's that simple. He's not, you know, and so people, if anybody was ridiculed, is him, but not for Roswell. They try to find something ridiculous, like, oh, he's a motorcycle rider. Well, yeah, sometimes he also a mountain climber. Oh, that makes him bad. Stuff just because you can't. Again, he was again an incredible voice in this whole,
Yes.
the whole Roswell epic story, and
Yes.
my grandfather too, of course. But no, back to your question. It's like, no, I really have never. I can't think of ever being ridiculed.
Good.
Once in a while, someone will walk up to me and they'll say, you're wrong. This is what happened. I said, well, maybe you're right. I'm not saying you're wrong, but but more than anything, it's been actually, like I said, I think I'm just that generation where people, they liked the idea of it, they wanted to question it, but they didn't ridicule it. They think you're crazy or whatever. So for whatever reason, I grew up in the country in the middle of nowhere, kind of. So maybe that was part of it too. But no, it was never any issues.
I love the fact that both of your grandfathers were motorcycle riders. Not that we can draw some generalization from that, however. Shanelle, do you remember anybody poking fun at you along the way because of your famous grandfather?
No, when I moved to Portland, my mom had made this plaque dedicated to grandfather, and I moved it in with my stuff. My roommates thought it was really cool, but unfortunately, like, my mother grew up ridiculed in school pretty bad. Green Acres had come out, and there was Arnold the Pig, and so she got called Arnold the Pig just because everybody would thought that my grandfather was crazy. Yeah. So I mean, and that really hurt her. And I've nothing bad ever happened to me. Totally skipped a generation. Unfortunately, a lot of people, like, we're the grandchildren. So I mean, there's generations back that this happened, and people have forgotten or don't know about it. And like the speech I made, I wrote in college to do, like, at UFO festival. There's a festival in honor of my grandfather, which I think is really cool, the Flying Saucer Party, and I got to do my speech there. But there's a lot more to my grandfather's story, because he kind of got involved in something else called the Maury Island incident, and some people want to say that was the first UFO thing that happened to humanity, but my grandfather, at the end of it, like, his friends died in the airplane that went down in Kelso with supposed UFO pieces on it, and it scared my grandfather so much he forgot to turn his fuel line on in his airplane, took off, and almost crashed. And luckily he landed it because he wasn't getting any gas in his airplane, but he just wanted to get out of there. There was the Men in Black, like, involved in it, and it was it was quite a thing, and it was part of the book, The Coming of the Saucers, that he wrote. But what breaks my heart, I just want to say, at the end of his life, he could have made the copyright of The Coming of the Saucers, and he just didn't do it because he was so, like, disheartened that there was no answer, and he tried so hard in his life to find an answer. He had a friend send in reel-to-reel of a UFO in the sky, and he sent it in the government. He's like, explain this, and they sent it back to him, and they cut it out and said there's nothing there, And my friend, and then just recently I showed you that picture. My friend had a UFO sighting, and he's a professional photographer. He took like 50 pictures of that UFO in California, and my friend, like, zoomed in on that picture too. I wish I would have said that would have been part of the show, because that was definitely a flying saucer in where he was. And of course he sent it to me because he had no idea who to send it to. I said that to you, didn't I, Peter? That UFO? Yeah. It's just, I don't know. It's great that photography has gotten so much better, but
it is. At the same time, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that the so-called Maury Island event was not fully authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And people came at your grandfather early on. He radiated integrity. He was a handsome, successful guy. I remember kind of being taken aback when I learned, he's a private pilot in 1947. That was something else again. But he owned 2 aircraft, not one. And again, he was somebody who was hard to take down. He was a successful businessman. Again, a really kind of movie star, handsome looking guy. In fact, although this is not from that moment in time, this is a bit later. This famous, probably the most famous photograph
Yeah.
of your grandfather. And then I love this. It's
Yeah.
you holding the same image.
And that's the original. That's the original. That's the original. My mom sleeps next to at night.
Oh my gosh. Wow. How cool is that?
That's the original. There's a water stain on it. It's very, you can barely see it, but
Well,
yeah,
hold on to that.
my
The
mom,
Smithsonian's going to want that at some
my
point in
mom
the
sleeps
future.
next to that. I can't get it from her. She just had surgery and she told me where all the UFO stuff was. And then of course her surgery went fine and I'm keeping everything again. She's keeping everything again. But she gave me the tapes of the 1977 UFO Congress where my grandfather went and he was the honoree there, and he got to meet like Stan Freeman, and I thought that was so cool because finally I got to meet him in 2014. Then he passed away. I mean, it was just like a moment in time to meet him, and he was part of the older crowd that actually had met my grandfather. And remembered. I told him I loved him at the airport when he dropped him off. I was like, I love you, Stan. And he's like, oh, he didn't know what to say. But I mean, I just respect that guy so much because even for what he did with Jesse's family and, Stan Freeman he was all about the truth. He was, and a good investigator, I love that guy.
Like Jesse's father and grandfather. And Jesse, a question for you. As I recall, your grandfather passed at about 89 or so?
86, yeah.
86.
Yeah.
How old were you when he died?
Yeah, I was, I think about a sophomore in high school, so that would have put me, gotta think about this for a second.
14,
17, 16, 15, somewhere in there.
Okay.
No, more like 14, 15, actually. Yeah, that. Sorry.
You didn't live in close proximity at any point in your life, but you did spend time with him.
Yeah, we were lucky enough. When we were really young, we spent more time than later on. But we'd take the trek and drive from Helena, Montana, actually outside Helena, Montana, down to Louisiana. And those trips alone, there's a lot of stories behind it. I'm not Roswell related. There were a lot of fun growing up and seeing all the stuff from. But yeah, so we did that a few of the summers, and then later on, we all went down with Lynn and my dad, and then the kids went down, and I got a fair amount of I don't know, some personal time with my grandfather. All of us did, and he was a very enjoyable person. He was very how do you call it, interesting, very. I'm trying the word. He was very intelligent, but he could explain things to you on a simple level that would make sense. And I think that's kind of where my father got it from. Excuse me.
Yes.
He was back before I was alive. He was a TV and radio repairman, and that's what in that time I was told. Linda shared a story with me one time, and I remember. I think my father's part of that, where they'd actually take rafts up and down the bayous. And he'd pull up on the bayou and help, fix a TV or something like that. And that's kind of how he started out. But again, very humble man, and obviously it was through those were the beginnings. He ended up by doing he was actually worked with maps. Is kind of where he started out, and then from maps with Shell Oil. He was there. Then he went into coming up in the Second World War, and then he ended up by going to intelligence school. And go ahead.
As we go on in our conversations off the air, one of the things that you really got me thinking about is the events in your grandfather's life that kind of put the steel in his back, that prepared him on a certain level to deal with what he ultimately had to deal with, which was a level of condescension, ridicule, rejection, slings and arrows. And I was remembering that I think it's toward the end of one of my favorite Dickens novels is either Great Expectations, but the line is, the best steel goes through the hottest fire. And your grandfather was a fighter pilot during World War II who was shot down, captured by the Germans, and spent time in a prison camp. I'm going to get to that in a bit, but my question for you right now, and it's sort of a double question, and then we'll get back to some of your thoughts, Shanelle, is do you remember about how old you were the first time you really got what the implications were of this massive story that your grandfather had been involved in? And then for me, I loved your dad. I mean, he radiated integrity like his father, I imagine. He is incredibly down to earth. He is extremely knowledgeable. He did something most sons are incapable of. He followed in the best parts of his father's footsteps.
Yeah.
He joined the military to serve his country. He became a physician, ended up his professional life as a flight surgeon in Iraq at like 70 years old.
72.
And
Yeah, he was
72.
oldest full-bird colonel out there. Yeah, it's crazy.
But his account, and he told it many times in his life, and it never changed. It was absolutely rock solid. And it's the kind of stuff that for a lot of us that dreams are made of. That moment where he's awakened by his father at some point in the night, sound asleep, and asked to come down to the kitchen. And there's this box, this cardboard box and pieces laid out that your grandfather had collected in the debris field, and getting an idea as a boy what these were. Of course, a few days later, intelligence, MPs come to knock, everything's confiscated, including his special piece, and the rest is history and legend. But do you remember the first time, how old you were, and how this hit you, that this was really part of your family's life? I don't know if I can even imagine it, and I have a very good imagination.
I think it probably started more when I was 8 or 9 years old. But what's funny is that this is me, but it's like the story and interesting, and it's not children are full of wonderment. You're not as stuck in societal whatever believe about this or that and the other.
Yeah.
And the idea that there's life in the universe outside off Earth. It's like, well, that makes sense. And my dad introduced me to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that was my incubation into science fiction anyway. And the Roswell stories kind of went along with it. It's like, well, it makes sense. And of course, I can't say as a kid how much I recognized the difference between science fiction and reality, but it kind of grew up that way. And I always go back to the story where my father really cemented it in. And I would have figured it was kind of the same age he was when he was involved, when he looked at the debris on their floor. And that would have been 11 or 12 years old, in that we always sat down at the counter, had a TV at the end of it, and we watched Star Trek. And I've always, the story, it's like, what's interesting is when I'm sitting there eating dinner with my family, and we're watching whatever episode that would have been. I'm a huge Trek fan, by the way. Is that as a child, it was never like bad, good. These things are whatever this is. I always envisioned it that I'm a child sitting at a table eating dinner, and there's other worlds where there's other children sitting at a table eating dinner with their families. But it's always had that kind of a view of it. Of this whole experience. There's no it seems everything was is within your touch of your fingertips. It wasn't and like I said, what's funny enough, it didn't seem extraordinary. It's like we went through it, and we didn't really realize that that doesn't everybody talk about this stuff? It was just common. There was nothing that fantastical about it. But again, that idea that where that bridge was made between, I guess, where I identified was through Star Trek.
Yeah. Shanelle, do you remember about how old you were and what it was like when you first realized on a basically profound level that what your grandfather had seen, reported, and became world famous for, the implications of it, and that this was your grandfather? This wasn't somebody out there in the world who set this
Yeah.
extraordinary era in motion. It was him. Do you remember about how old you were and what that was like for you when that really sank in for the first time?
It's as far as I can remember. I just grew up believing just because it was a family belief, and it took me a while and older to agree with my mother that they came from other dimensions, because she said that's what grandfather always believed in. And like when I stayed with the Hare Krishnas for a while, they talk about the Vimanas. I think I'm saying that right. The
The
flying,
Vimyanas,
yeah,
the ancient,
yeah,
in Indian
and the bombs,
legend
and
tradition,
yeah,
these
they're
spaceships.
yeah, 5,000-year-old texts, and
Yep.
that's like proof, and I don't study with Hare Krishnas anymore, but I mean, that's kind of why I got into philosophy, because I really thought that religion was more of an omnistic thing. There's truth in all religions, but they
Yes.
tell you that your religion's the only religion. And it just, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of problems in the world with everybody fighting over, it's always religious fights,
Yes.
they don't want to say
We'll
it, but
kill you
like,
in the name of God.
Ukraine is too Western, so they have Western ideas, and so Russia doesn't like that. And Western civilization in college, here it goes. It's like Russia's going to take over Ukraine. It's sad, but it happens. And yeah, it's sad that we just can't all just be at peace, and the whole world be at peace. And
Right.
we're always fighting over religion, and we're cursed by the color of our skin too. It just divides us so much. I
I
feel.
couldn't agree with you more. I
Yeah.
think for me, one of the most important aspects of people like us that come at this from different backgrounds, and so many of our friends and colleagues, is that taking this subject seriously and understanding the deep implications for humanity necessitates one to begin to realize that there is so much more that unites us, that we have in common with other human beings, more and more as the world gets smaller, where we're all
Mhm.
more interdependent, where we are assisting in a climate crisis of undetermined
Oh, yeah.
outcome. And that if we don't get it together, in the words of Benjamin Franklin, if we don't well, to paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, if we don't hang together, we will hang individually. And I wanted to go back to Kenneth Arnold's sighting and try to imagine. It's so easy to kind of gloss over this on a certain level. I don't mean it in a disrespectful way, but yeah, Kenneth Arnold had the sighting, etc. To imagine being a private pilot, and he was in the air at that time um, because a plane had gone down,
Mhm.
and Civil Air Patrol and independent pilots, as well as military, were out in the Cascade, over the Cascade National Forest, which is a pretty wilderness area, to try to locate this aircraft. And it was kind of a quirk of fate that when he landed, there were reporters at the airport specifically to find out, at different airports in the
Mhm.
area, if anybody had broken the story. And he told his story. And good, bad, or indifferent, when a reporter asked him to describe what their movement was like, it was to the effect of, like stones or skimming over the water, like a saucer skimming over the water. And that unfortunate phrase of flying saucers. Wait, cup and saucer, flying, haha, that's funny. Where little green men came out from, I don't know. I've never had descriptions of green ones. Perhaps you have. But I came upon an illustration of one interpretation, and artist interpretations vary widely, of what your grandfather saw, but from the point of view of being closer. He was well in the distance, and the way that he was able to estimate the speed as a good professional was to calculate how long it took them to go from point A to Mount Rainier. And he calculated that they were moving at about, from most accounts, 18,000 miles an hour.
Yeah. He
That's
is Mount Adams and Mount Rainier.
that's pretty fast, but it was a lot faster in 1947,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And this is the image. And I thought, holy shit, if I were flying along and there was no precedent for anything like this, I would be completely gobsmacked. And to just let that image sink in for a moment of what we can only imagine was going through Kenneth Arnold's mind. And when you are flying and you're a pilot, I've had a number of friends who've flown privately and I've flown with them. You've got a lot of stuff on your mind. You've got to keep your eye on the ball and stay focused on the job, or you will die. And that is not what you're after. Shanelle, this is such a lovely picture. Tell us about this photo.
That's me and my brother. Our birthdays are 5 days apart. We're two Leos, and grandfather was holding Cameron when he looks like he's about 2, because I look like I'm about 4, but that was a birthday party. But yeah, that was grandfather, and he does have one of his turquoise bow ties on, but you can barely see it. It seems like, but yeah, that was a good memory of him. I have it framed and have it up in my house.
It's beautiful. Jesse, you shared a few pictures with me, which we'll get to shortly. Everybody knows what your grandfather looked like, but from a series of pretty much stock shots. He's, a handsome guy in a rugged way. And all of these guys, they look like movie stars in their uniforms. There's something very modest about the American military uniform, as opposed to, all the bells and whistles of the fascists. And it's, it's all business. And Shanelle, you sent me a picture that I'd never seen before, obviously.
Thank you. I'm glad you're going to share it.
A family picture, but I thought, this is a great photo. This is now my very favorite photo of Kenneth Arnold.
It's my favorite too. Well, that one. There's another one too. Yeah, that's him just out in Boise before all the people moved here. There's fields actually. Now there isn't, but he was just looking up to the sky, wanting an answer.
But at the same time, looking extremely sharp.
Yeah.
A really nice sports jacket. Foot on something called a bumper, younger viewers.
Yeah.
Which we really should still have. How they conned us out of them, I don't know. Whoop, front end damage. Right. That's $1,500 because the other car touched you. I'm still pissed off at that. Bring bumpers back. I'm very reactionary. But there is this great.
That's one I love. That's one I love.
Wow.
I didn't enlarge it right, but yeah, I love that.
That's
picture.
Fine.
That's mine. It's hanging up in my house.
He looks sensational. And Jesse, you sent one of the young Jesse Marcel Sr., which really caught me off guard. Do you know about how old he was in this picture?
That had to be 15, 17, I don't know, something like that. Yeah. Well, and kind of a funny story about, like my grandfather is we're primarily French in background. So my grandfather had to get into the military. He was underweight. And I mean, all those things. It's kind of one of those stories. It's always like there's like they did on Captain America, wherever a small guy, he had to get through that doorway for them to take him. I mean, I think it was like 5'5", 120 pounds maybe. So he was a really small person as far as that goes. But yeah, it was all that he had to be pretty young. Yeah, I couldn't tell you, but yeah, late teens anyway.
A similar story about my dad. He, like every American, concerned about the war coming on. His parents were European Jews, and he was a member of the YMHA, Young Men's Hebrew Association, and their main branch is in New York City, not surprisingly, and it's on 92nd Street. The 92nd Street Y has gone on to become an internationally recognized cultural venue. When he was young and a member in the 30s, plays that went on Broadway, they'd bring them there for these young Jewish guys to watch for 10 or 20 cents. And then, these people went on to be stars. And he was just finishing up at a meeting of a club that he belonged to. And they were in the lobby. They come down from the meeting and they've got a big old, a stand-up radio in there. And it's dead quiet, except for everybody listening to these reports coming in from somewhere called Pearl Harbor.
Oh.
And unlike a lot of guys, he decided to enlist. He knew if he waited, it could be a year or so before he was drafted, but he wanted in, like a lot of young Jewish men, most of whom were not tough guys. He wanted to get over there and kill Germans, and he's a very peaceful guy, but that's the way they thought back then. He was also maybe 120, but like 5'3",
Okay.
and he had ear damage. And when he went for his physical, the doctor basically said, "Listen, you don't have to go in. This is, and he said, no, I'm going in." His disappointment was that he tested too high on his basic tests and he didn't go into combat. He was a teacher of radar for fighter plane and bomber operators and operated throughout the States at that point. But he was Army Air Corps all the way, like your dad. Shanelle, do you remember at any point any of your friends growing up thinking or saying to you, "I'd really like to meet your grandfather. I've heard about him and, he's famous in a certain way," or they just accepted that, he was your grandfather and it wasn't that much of a big deal for them?
No, really popular here in Boise. I'm pretty popular. They put me in the community paper, and, it's a Boise story that happens this time of year. We don't really have newspapers anymore, but usually the newspaper would put something in it. And definitely believing in what my grandfather saw in his story. I just want it to be told for the truth. I want him to be remembered as, the first person that started ufology, possibly, because
Yes.
he was the right person in the right place and time. He was search and rescue for Idaho, and he could have swore he could have found that C-46 military airplane that had crashed on Mount Rainier. But what is crazy, like I told you, and I want people to know this, he had his sighting on June 24th. They found the plane on July 24th, and they had the ceremony for the funeral on August 24th. And he thought that was really odd. It seemed like everything was with the number 24 being important.
Yeah.
But that always, kind of puzzled him. And, and he just was overwhelmed with all the attention he got. He got letters from all over the world. I mean, he was told that he was the prophet for the end of the world, all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yes.
I mean, and still like crazy times we live in, but
his story was also, how can I say, used. Your father was a man who, again, integrity, grandfather, honesty, and, never wavered, like the Marcels, from his account. A very famous American publisher, writer, kind of almost cult figure in a way in the world of science fiction, Ray Palmer, who published a very popular science fiction magazine. Your father got involved with him, and it didn't really turn out terribly well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
He kind of felt sorry for Ray Palmer because he was a hunchback, and but he still thought he was interesting because of the magazine he put out, Fate, and he kept everything true. But I do want to say one point before I forget. In the 60s, Doubleday Books offered my grandparents $50,000 for the story, but they were going to fictionalize it, and he would not do it. And my grandmother was so mad. She wanted that money so bad.
That's a huge amount of money.
That would have set like me up with money, but he just didn't want his story fictionalized at all. And he was just like a nuts and bolts guy, he just was simple, and he just it just was beyond him. It was always a transcendent experience. He had a sighting near Mount Shasta as well in California, and it always seems to be near these volcanoes, and they could be, I don't know, I just feel like with all the ancient aliens I've watched, it's their portals for these flying saucers, and they come from other dimensions because light years to travel takes too much time.
Or they found a way to do what we think is impossible.
Or travel, it's just travel. The whole travel thing blows my mind. It's like, how are they getting here? Is it that's why I definitely kind of believe in multidimensional beliefs.
You're actually on a science level. There is evidence behind the idea that space time doesn't exist above the fourth dimension, that sort of thing. So the idea that traversing anywhere in the universe at any point is possible. I mean, we're even breaching our science is getting close to that. So thinking the science of someone else 1,000 years ahead of us, or whatever, even 100 years ahead of us, might have done that. So, so that idea, above the fourth dimension, anyway. So there is some science behind that. It's because you get this quasi philosophy and these other ideas. Like I said, you bring a religion into it and those kind of things. But if you do stick on the science side, and you look at it as the realities as we understand them in our universe or multiple universes, it does make sense. That possibly everything from information. We crack that code, or we might be having signals coming from everywhere. We just haven't gotten to that point yet. But again, the science is being at least affronted. We're not asymptotic to that barrier of light speed as we thought we were up until the last few years. We think we can actually get close to, if not exceed, all those barriers without breaking physics. It's just a matter of exactly in a different dimensional sense that space-time does not exist. So you could, really, distance doesn't exist at that point. It's basically.
I think some of the factionalism that we see in the world of UFO studies is based on kind of a popularity contest of people who say it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. I repeated this parable a number of times, but the story about the 6 blind men and the elephant, all trying to explain to each other what the elephant is, when one has the trunk, the other has a leg, the other's holding an ear, the other's got the tail, the other's got the tusk, the other's patting the thing on the side. And they're hearing the descriptions of the other guys, and they're all wrong because they know what the elephant is. I think this is part of the overall problem. Now, Shanelle, you had a UFO sighting when you were living in Portland. Can you tell us about your UFO sighting?
Yeah, after my first daughter was born, the first job I got was delivering newspapers for a newspaper in Vancouver, Washington. And I lived there, and went to school there. And, I ended up coming back to Boise. But there was one night, the night I quit, I was listening to Coast to Coast. It was Art Bell. That's how long ago it was. This is like 2000, sometime in there. And I was delivering newspapers. And then all of a sudden I noticed this green and blue, huge, like disc-like thing. And all the lights are moving, all hovering, like in a couple fields away from me. And I was just like, oh my God, am I actually seeing that? I'm listening to Coast. And I kept telling myself, that can't be there. That can't be there. And so I finished my route, and it kept staying there. And I kept looking at my watch going, oh my gosh, they're going to abduct me or something. But, I was very aware of it. And it just stayed there, hovering there. And then it went and disappeared. And I quit the next day just because it freaked me out so bad. And, I quit because I saw a UFO. But it was quite the experience. And it felt like they knew that I was there.
What time about, day or night, was this?
God, it was like 4 or 5 in the morning. Okay. Yeah, I had to get up early. I went to bed at 9 and had to get up 2, 3 to get the newspapers.
Well, so you had, the added challenge of, I had a UFO sighting, but you are now the only person I know who had a UFO sighting while listening to the Art Bell show.
Yes,
that's one for the books.
It is, yeah.
You've also reminded me that Fate magazine, which is the oldest paranormal and UFO magazine in continuous publication, certainly in American history, maybe the world, began exactly a year after your grandfather's famous sighting, and its very first issue dealt with Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting. Jesse, have you ever had a UFO sighting?
Yeah, I and my brother, we were young. We were grade schoolers, probably maybe middle school, somewhere around there. My brother's 2 years younger than me, and my father, and we were just out of Helena, Montana. There wasn't a lot out there about that time. Driving down one of the country roads, and we noticed what looked like a white sliver kind of coming across the view of the car, and it came in and just sat there. And then we thought, well, that's interesting, And then we ended up stopped in the car. We got out and took a look at it, and it just sat there perfectly silent. Nothing. Just looked like again the typical idea of what a UFO might look like from the side, just a little disc sitting out there. And we sat and watched it for like maybe 5 minutes, and then it went straight up and was gone. And so it was kind of a nice experience with my father, and we all like that.
Wow.
Yeah, well, the very least, it was an unidentified flying object. But yeah, no, it was definitely an experience. And again, I think the same thing as Shanelle. You grow up with this stuff. It's not like, oh my gosh. It's like, wow, that's really neat. It's like, yeah, it's like. So it's all that like, again, being kind of indoctrinated since you're a child, and definitely growing up in that idea is that it wasn't really a question of what it was.
Yes.
My grandfather absolutely knew what it was, and he was one of those people that knew enough about what was going on technologically and etc., that when he said something like it's not made by us, not made by human hands, there's some significance to that. He's not, he has a background to be able to say something like that.
2 pictures of your grandfather I'd like to share, Jesse. This is the one, or one of the ones, that most people know best. And
Sure.
It's one that every time I look at it really pisses me off. I just try to get behind his eyes every once in a while. Can't do it.
Sure.
And try to understand. I mean, the few days before, the implications of what he had been wrestling with, the scene that Mac Brazel had walked him into in that huge property and that huge debris field, and knowing how real this crash was, and knowing from the properties of the metal just holding a piece, this was not, aluminum, and, the mystery metal, that kind of thing. And then being forced to pose here, knowing that this photo was going to go out on the wire services, not just around the country, but around the world.
Oh, yeah.
Although we'll talk about it in the second half of the show, some things that really inspired me that you shared with me about your grandfather and his general attitude toward the end of his life about all this stuff and how he took it. That Paul David's and Don Schmitt's wonderful film, Roswell, of any UFO-related film I have ever watched in my life, and like you guys, I've seen a lot of them, deals more, I think, accurately and with more empathy and more humanity about the implications of having the courage to come forward at that moment in history and simply stand by what you saw and what you experienced, to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and being attacked culturally by your colleagues, by people who were your friends and no longer want to be your friends, estranged from so much of what you long to be part of. Anyway, it's a wonderful film. I recommend it highly. A photo of Jesse Sr. toward the end of his life.
Yeah.
Still,
Do you mind if I add a little bit of backstory with what you're just talking about?
Yeah, please.
The previous picture. It's like, this is just something that comes up. It's like, when you imagine my grandfather by himself in a car driving out to the field after already seeing some of the debris at the local at the police office, and at that time looking at it and not understanding what he was looking at, but he's looking at, this is kind of strange, it's interesting, checking the records, and when you get back, it wasn't nothing that we didn't have anything go down out there. And I keep thinking about at that time out in the middle of nowhere, driving his car out to this debris field, and then looking at it and realizing that this is very significant and very interesting. And as the story goes, it's like, yeah, he brought home some home before returning to the base to show my father and his wife. And he, the whole reason was that, yeah, this is going to be swept up, it's going to be gone. So I wanted to have you guys a chance to take it. But when he went to right before that picture was taken, he actually thought that, my goodness, they're actually going to bring this out. They're actually going to say this is something that happened. And my sister picked this up. Is that if you look at the pictures, what do you look when you're having a picture taken of you? You look at the photographer. You'll notice that every single picture here, my grandfather's being someone's, I don't know, yelling at him, but telling him to put up, take a picture, because he's not looking at the cameraman. As I said, I think it's very significant but my sister discovered that thing. You're right. Millions of pictures. This isn't a regular picture. This is a complete setup just on that part. And
Not
like
a
I said,
single one. You're absolutely right.
He thought that before he walked in that room, down the hallway with the MPs behind him, he thought,
damn,
wow, this is amazing. And then he walked in the room and realized it's not going to be amazing. So
I've been set up.
Yeah, it's part of the story. But
again, obviously I never met your grandfather, but I was lucky enough to not just know your dad, but I could say I considered him a friend, which I do, but I'm much prouder of the fact that he considered me a friend. And, like a lot of us in the work, we really got together at events, at conferences that we were speaking at. The last time I saw him was early May, maybe even May 4th, May 1st, right in there at the end of Stephen Bassett's brilliant disclosure event at the National Press Club, Citizens Disclosure event. And that was, it was the morning we were all leaving the hotel. And you took a picture of me and your dad.
Yeah.
And he passed some months later. But it's always one of my all-time favorite photos with any of the colleagues that I know. Or I've had the honor of meeting over these years, and there was nobody like him. And we all hold him in our hearts and our memory. And right now, believe it or not, we have blown through our first hour. This is Peter Robbins with my special guests, Shanelle Schanz and Jesse Marcel, and we will be returning in less than 4 minutes with our next guest, Donald R. Schmitt. Stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Scrolling all day, time can disappear. Wanna make it count, why not volunteer?
Posting pics of your food, that takes up time. Time, you got time to binge all of season 9, though it got so bad.
Time, you got time. We're gonna grow back and be the same browse you had.
Just a few hours to keep families from harm. Help us end home fires, but sound the alarm.
Volunteer for a day to install free smoke alarms in your community.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected. Only at kgradb.com.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with Peter Robbins and my special guests, Shanelle Schanz and Jesse Marcel III. And joining us now is Donald R. Schmitt. Don is the former co-director of the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, where he served as director of special investigations for 10 years. Don was a special investigator for Dr. Hynek prior to that. A 7-time best-selling author, his first book, UFO Crash at Roswell, was made into the Golden Globe nominee movie Roswell, which we were just talking about. And yes, right. And his book, Witness to Roswell, was the #1 best-selling UFO book in the world for 2 straight years, and with good cause. He's also the co-founder of the globally famous International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell, New Mexico. He is also a dear and esteemed friend and colleague. Don Schmitt, welcome to Meanwhile Here. Welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth. You're a regular.
Thank you, Peter, and certainly I share the same esteem. So it's great to be back, and I'm happy that both Shanelle and my dear friend Jess has remained on the program still. I hope we can squeeze it all in the next hour.
I know that you were auditing the show for a good part of the first hour.
Yes.
And when I was thinking about who I wanted to join us, we've got a lot of good competition in here. You're best known for your work on Roswell, but you have been so deeply involved in the world of UFO studies and very familiar with the Arnold incident and its implications. And really, the worldwide reaction it set in motion. And I'd like to turn a good part of this second half of the show over to you in terms of your thoughts, your commentary, questions that you have for Shanelle and Jesse about their famous grandfathers, about Jesse Jr., and where we stand right now as we're on the edge of the 75th anniversary.
I know, and to think that the 25 years ago was the 50th.
Yeah.
But the saddest aspect of that is a good number of the witnesses from the 47 incident were still with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember how many of them left town. They didn't want people coming to their very doorsteps. And as many people of the press, as I recall, there were over 300 media people who had descended on Roswell at that time. And a number of the debunkers had, slithered in.
From the desert.
To, say anything to our faces. It's always behind our backs. And one of the things, and I posted the question for Jess, because one of the things that they're claiming right now, and I always issue them the challenge. If you feel you've won the war, why do you continue to engage us?
Right.
You've won the argument, you've won the day, but you cannot even allow us to commemorate an anniversary without you still trying to remain relevant. And sorry, it's falling on deaf ears. And because all you can do is spin and twist and manipulate the words, such as in the case of Jess, both his grandfather and his father. And in fact, just this afternoon, I saw posted, again, a nobody, an absolute nobody who's never been so much to New Mexico, let alone read any of the books or talked to any of the witnesses. He's talking about how Jess's grandfather always described the material as rubber and foil and sticks and string and tape. And it's like, boy, did I miss that interview. I mean,
after all these years.
So it's like, how do you get away with that?
Yeah.
Because if we just misspell a word, you're jumping down our throats.
Yeah.
So then he also claims that one of their ilks, one of their kind, was in Roswell knocking on doors. And because nobody would talk to him, obviously there was no story to tell. Well, okay, let's just think back for a moment. This city, Roswell, shared territory with the first atomic bomb squadron in the world at that time.
Amen.
And you think that all of them grew up very suspect of the government, thinking that They would send in moles. They would send in, like they would call, like in the past, revenuers who would come in and test them at times. See who's talking. See who's got loose lips, so to speak. And they have this continuing attitude that they rise up and stand above everyone else. And if they don't talk to me, then obviously there's nothing to tell. It's like, crawl back under your rocks. You know, it's the only place we recognize you. Again, you don't know history. You don't know military history. And sorry, for those in the know, they realize that all you're doing is perpetuating as far as lies and myths on your part, and has no basis in reality, no basis in fact. You want to talk logic? I mean, I just spelled it out. And so they're not going to ever win the war. They don't win the battles. And I love the fact, like Jess's dad, when he told us that at the time it was Major James McAndrew who first wrote up the Project Mogul report, and then he wrote up the anthropomorphic wooden crash dummy, Roswell case closed. And the way he was calling your dad constantly, Jess, like, what's it going to take to convince you that all you saw was painted on it? I mean, you got a force, you know, an actual witness to reverse course, to change their story. That's how, you know, we get to the bottom of this. And I'll never forget the way your dad was so proud. And it was like, well, first of all, Sonny, I outrank you. So a little respect for an officer. And then secondly, you're never going to change my mind. You're never going to convince me as far as otherwise what I saw, what I held in my own hands. And the point being that McAndrew had to finally concede when he finally said, well, then I guess we'll never know what you held in your hands in your family kitchen on that night back in 1947. Again, end of argument. You conceded. And I would also suggest, why does the military, in this particular case, select someone in the reserves? At the time, McAndrew was a mere captain. Why did they select someone in the reserves? And he then comes up with the Mogul explanation, which he actually got from the late Robert Todd and the late Carl Flock, two skeptics. And
debunkers.
Yeah. They're not skeptics, they're debunkers. You're absolutely correct, Peter. And so, as I just stated to the media before the first congressional hearings a few weeks ago, the Pentagon never sends anyone up the Capitol Hill who may accidentally tell the truth. And the same would apply to James McAndrew. He becomes an authority on Project Mogul, on anthropomorphic crash dummies. He certainly has not had any access to any reality concerning the 1947 incident. So he can't slip. He can't make a mistake. He can't speak out of turn. All he knows is Project Mogul and Project High Dive and Project Excelsior, the two crash dummy projects. So they're safe. That's why they're selected. And to me, that demonstrates that they're starting with a false premise to begin with.
Yes.
Instead of someone who actually may have access to the truth, it's like somebody who has absolutely zero connection to the reality of what transpired for the very incident they're investigating. And so it's a non-qualifier. It just sorry.
Right.
It doesn't work on us. Doesn't work on us.
Don, what do you think about kind of the timing historically? We have come to the summer of 1947. America is very much, in many respects, the place we wish it was now.
Mm-hmm.
We had helped the European allies to defeat fascism in Europe and in Asia. We had done something that I don't think had ever been done before in history. Instituted what was called the Marshall Plan after General and then Secretary of State Marshall, whereby we actually not only assisted our former enemies in rebuilding
We rebuilt them.
their infrastructure and their societies, but in building democracies. And
Precisely.
look at the legacy of it. When was the last time Japan or Germany declared war on anybody?
My God, look at the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki right now.
Yeah.
They look like the World's Fair.
Yeah.
That's
And
us. We did that.
yes, in
So
great part.
we defeat and then we rebuild. I'm sorry,
And
that is our legacy in this
I
country.
always thought it was just and I think it was a coincidence. I believe in coincidences as well as there are certain things that are so off the charts that they seem either predestined or fate or into a realm of more exotic thinking. But the summer of 1947, an article was published in Foreign Affairs magazine by a political thinker, somebody who went on to become a very important force in American policy, who went by the pseudonym in the article of X, and the article was called On Containment. And it theorized, here we were at this moment. George Kennan, by the way, was the author's name, who went on to advise, I think, a record-breaking 9 presidents. He lived to be over 100. And he postulated that here we were, having just ended a hot war, facing the force that we knew would be our new enemy, and possibly an even deadlier enemy, because they were sooner or later going to have the atomic bomb, the Soviet Union. And that perhaps, rather than engaging in another hot war, we could contain them within the area that they'd expanded to by the end of the war and create like an iron curtain. And instead of having a hot war, a shooting war, have a war of attrition or a Cold War.
Right.
Truman basically made it policy and we move forward. What I'm saying here is that the Cold War began at the same moment as our modern age of UFO, our era, which they were used, well, they still are. Look over here, not over here. And that we had a week, maybe less. Do you, of all the people I know, can you zone in on the day that you feel the crash occurred? For me, it's always a few days play, but it's within a week. And we have this moment in time where history completely changes, although not fully acknowledged, God knows, at the time. But the Arnold sightings, the Roswell crash, bang, we're off on a new trajectory, and we're into the Cold War.
I first wanted to mention to Shanelle, one of the things that UFO historians, and personally I believe Dr. Bruce Maccabee has done definitive work.
Good job. He's great. He did 3 minutes in June, and unfortunately, see, that's like a lot. Bless you. That's how long his sighting was 3 minutes, and I kind of lost track on Ray Palmer, but Ray Palmer needed more to write about instead of 3 minutes. 3 minutes of seeing a UFO. So the Maury Island thing happened. My mom has always been defiant on it. It's a fake. It's a hoax. The UFO material looked like sludge from a volcano, and but it was shady because the 2 military men that were there to look into it, they crashed in Kelso. Their plane went down, and that scared my grandfather. But anyhow, it was all because Ray Palmer paid him $200 to go investigate it in Seattle, the Maury Island thing. But and they're kind of connected to the Chehalis Flying Saucer Party, where they want me to go again this year, and like speak and do a speaker panel, and that's great. It's in honor of him, but I hope that I'm doing a good job.
Well, one of the things that I've suggested to Bruce and a number of other historians, what they need to do is demonstrate that, aside from the Arnold sighting, that most of the sightings at that time were craft in formation, that they were more often seen flying in formation, as though upon their first arrival that it was either to protect one another, we can speculate all we'd like, or a show of power. Lest we forget that even in 52, the DC, as far as overflights in July at that time, a week apart, there too, objects in formation. So this set a theme shortly thereafter that UFOs typically were seen in multiple, as far as multiple craft. And it's one of the reasons that the Arnold sighting stands through that period of time. And then leading up to Roswell, I often point out that anyone could go to a public library and pull out all the microfilm, the microfiche of all the newspapers from June 24th leading up to Roswell, and the banner headlines day after day after day through all the major newspapers about the flying discs, about the flying saucers.
Wow.
And they were scrambling P-51 Mustangs with first the hope that they might be able to bring one down. And then after that, they would show pilots mounting 35 millimeter camera on the front of the airplane with the hope of at least capturing something on film, that type of thing. So Roswell, what's most fitting about Roswell is that it happened in the hotbed of all military activity at that time. I always point out when I lecture, especially on college campuses, and if the faculty is present, I'll always raise the question, where was the first atomic bomb detonated? And you'd be surprised how many of the learned, academia, well, of course, Japan. No, how about 2 hours west of Roswell?
Yeah.
And then you had ongoing atomic research at Los Alamos. You had all the testing of the captured German V-2 rockets at White Sands Proving Ground. And then at Roswell, the 509th, first atomic bomb squadron in the world. And either Jess or I could emphasize enough the fact that this was a composite squadron where they selected the best officers, the best pilots, crew, doctors, nurses for a reason. And the fact that Jess's grandfather was head of intelligence of the 509th, all with the top security clearance for the atomic bomb. That would have made him the #1 intelligence officer in the U.S. military at that time.
Yep.
We can't deny that. As much as, again, the scoffers like to, knock him down to size to their level. And to have experienced what we've based on all the timelines and the Daniel Wilmot sighting down in Roswell that afternoon, and the weather, we finally acquired the records from the Stallion Weather Network at that time, and the severe lightning storm that came off the Southern Capitan Mountains was between 11:30 the same night that we were trying to pin down, and that would be July 2nd. July 2nd, 1947. And Brazel, the ranch foreman, he's not the owner, he's the foreman. Right. He's in charge. He doesn't have a hired hand. He would have a number of the neighboring boys like Timothy D. Proctor, 7 years old. They put you on a horse as fast as you can walk back, at that time. And that was the extent of his help. And he waits until his chores are finished for the week before he comes into Roswell. Sunday, that July 6th. And who should pick up the phone from the sheriff's office after Brazel? Unfortunate for the military, he speaks to a member of the press, that being Frank Joyce from radio station KGFL. So it's already leaked out. And Brazel already talked about the bodies, the horrible stench at another location. So as Jess, I'm sure, related, who picks up the phone? Mm-hmm. His grandfather. He's having a sandwich at the PX at the time. But I can't emphasize enough also, it's a 4th of July holiday weekend. Most of the personnel are home on leave with their families. They're not testing anything. Nothing is reported missing. They're not on standby should anything be reported. And after Major Marcel takes the phone call and he goes to the courthouse to check it out firsthand, and he returns back to the base. It's important enough that he alerts the very base commander, Colonel William Blanchard. How dare you? It's a holiday weekend. What are you bothering me over this weather balloon? I don't care if you don't recognize it. I mean, check it out. And the point is, then why doesn't Blanchard dispatch a couple grunts, a couple of enlisted men to just to humor Blanchard? No, he sends out Major Marcel, and he sends out the head of counterintelligence, Captain Sheridan Cabot, who was an expert on foreign technology at that time, already suggesting that they don't know what this is. So that's where the logic comes in. So before anything is even recovered, all the pieces are suggesting that this was something extraordinary. And that's just performing due diligence, just doing your historic homework and being able to demonstrate that, gee, they're sure not acting like this was a balloon or anything else conventional. And for anyone, as Jess, and I'm sure I know you've been out there as well, Peter, who's actually been out to the debris field. That's why we had the scene in the movie. Because, again, these scoffers, they demonstrate their ignorance, their naivety. Once you're up there, and if you've ever flown over the areas I have in helicopter and plane, once you're airborne, you can see for 50 miles. It's totally unobscured. If they were missing anything, they would have found it before the rancher, before Brazel even did. They weren't looking for anything, and the point being, if it wasn't ours, then whose was it? No one is able to put a mobile balloon out there. No one. There are no witnesses to it being a balloon of any sort. And there certainly aren't any witnesses to it being a wooden crash dummy, because that project didn't even originate till 1952.
Yeah, a little bit off, yeah.
That really is adding. It would be funny if it wasn't so insanely insulting, infuriatingly so.
So
and Don, my father probably talked to you about this too. Is that back to a few minutes ago, leading up to the crash, there were a lot of lights going through town over the city,
yes,
where people were pulling. Like my father specifically said, where some nuns had pulled some kids off the street because it was scaring them, whatever. So I'm just kind of going back to what you said about the coming in multiple numbers, but there was a number of sightings that led before the crash right in Roswell.
Exactly, exactly. And in fact, we found clippings that there had been unknowns tracked over White Sands within days leading up to Roswell. So
there's a lot of stuff.
New Mexico was the hotbed of military testing and research. So to me, it's always made perfect sense. The first thing you check out is your military potential. Do they have a bigger stick than you do? And what better place than New Mexico? And as we've also speculated, that very flash from Trinity is still traversing out through the galaxy as an intelligent signal. Is that the beacon? Is that the one thing that alerted them and brought them here to begin with?
Yeah,
I know it's speculation, but why not? Why not?
My father and our discussions, like I think my grandfather too, but a lot of that was that same idea is that that whatever it is, that was definitely, we had reached a certain point in our evolution, and that would make sense that maybe we're more interested to come take a look at that point.
I'm going to jump in for a moment and ask Shanelle and Jesse, and no reason that this happened, but now I'm curious to know, Shanelle, if your grandfather ever mentioned or referred to, or any reference that he made to Roswell, and Jesse, any memory of your grandfather or your dad reflecting back on Kenneth Arnold's experience. Shanelle, you first.
No
reason it should be, but just curious.
Yeah, no, I think he believed that it was whatever happened, and getting back from what Don said, it has to do with the atom bombs going off. Something alerted them to crash here. And my grandfather believed that was true. I remember him saying that was, that was, they made it look fake, but it hadn't been a flying saucer. And just to bring this up, I didn't see this. My husband saw it. There were some, we had some UFO sightings over the pandemic in Boise. And one night there was a Black Hawk helicopter chasing a UFO in the sky. The next night they crashed. And, you know, it's like we saw them chasing the UFO in the sky. My husband did, you know, and I didn't. But anyhow, it's just, you know, they just don't ever release anything anymore about UFOs. And that I had a couple of UFO sightings over the pandemic. My husband saw that one night. And then I saw a group of about 8 flying saucers disappear into the sky, and wasn't able to get a picture. But yeah, there's a lot of weird things happening during the pandemic too, you know. Anyhow.
Jesse,
there's interesting how I'm sorry, go ahead, Pete. There's an interesting correlation because my father, when my grandfather brought the debris home for them in the kitchen, you know, laying it, she was pre-positioned on the floor and that kind of thing. And my grandfather, when they're putting it back in the box, suggested it was part of a flying saucer. And my dad didn't know what that was, which is interesting because your dad or your grandfather coined that phrase, and my grandfather already knew it days later. So it's interesting how that kind of came together. My dad, or my grandfather, or my dad, was saying, he'd never heard of a flying saucer before.
Fascinating.
It was because of your grandfather's description.
Yep.
And I've told Jesse and Denise, like our grandparents wanted us to be friends. You know, they made it happen. They're like up in heaven in the other dimension, making us all connect. You know, I love Denise. I've met Jesse, and, you know, I reached out to them just because of who they were. I was just like, oh my gosh, we got something in common, you know?
Absolutely. Very much so.
But Jesse, that's a wonderful point. As somebody that loves language and is fascinated by the derivation of terms, that term, flying saucer, had only been in use in the English language for less than a week.
Right.
Yeah.
And your grandfather was already familiar with it.
He already knew it.
Yeah, because it had been written up in some of the newspapers, and it was actually a reporter by the name of Bill Bichette.
Yep.
With Oregonian, who, upon interviewing your grandfather, Shanelle, then he came up with that very term, flying.
Yeah, he described him as rocks if you'd skip them on water. And then the reporter said, "Oh, that sounds like a flying saucer." So it was the way he described him.
Jess, I know I've told you this story in the past, but I think for Peter's audience, because it just is so symbolic of what it, as I've often described your father as an officer and a gentleman.
Yes.
I mean, I never have met someone with as good as a heart as your father.
Thank you.
And it was demonstrated. This was in May of 1990. And we had talked to your dad numerous times about being hypnotically regressed.
Oh, sure.
To go back to that night, relive that experience. And we were working with the late Dr. John Watkins, who was professor emeritus at the University of Montana at Missoula.
Okay.
And he was the hypnotherapist who got the Hillside Strangler to confess.
Whoa.
Under regression.
Oh, geez.
So it became highly recommended, and we interviewed him, we talked to him, and when he agreed to do this, we were very, very optimistic. And we did this in front of a film crew from NBC Today Show. They asked if they could witness, if they could film it. Well, for the better part of the afternoon, it was like it was professional resistance, doctor against doctor. He just had a very difficult time taking your father as far as into a deep enough trance that he was comfortable with that. He finally took your dad back a few years before that. And your dad is describing where he went to pick up a pecan pie for your father. I mean, for your grandfather, excuse me. And it fell off the bike.
Oh.
And your father was devastated because he so wanted to please your grandfather, his father.
I believe that.
And then when his dog died, shortly thereafter, he talked about that. So we went from just a couple years before where we brought him up to that early morning of July 8th, 1947, out in the kitchen. Now, mind you, this is just 4 years after your grandfather has passed away.
Yeah.
4 years. Now, your father is describing how the conversation back and forth was flying saucer, pieces of a flying saucer. And Dr. Watkins was impressed with the fact that Kevin Randall and I were handing him questions back and forth. And he was passing notes back to us that he was reliving this in the first person. He wasn't describing what he was observing. He was reliving it. Okay. Well, it was wonderful. It was like we were observers watching it take place. Well, then when he brought him back, when he brought him out of the trance, and your father opens his eyes and he looks from one side of the room to the other. And we never even anticipated this. But your dad started to go, Dad?
Oh,
And
no.
said, oh my God. And the tears started streaming on us as like, oh my God, he's just lost his dad all over again.
Yeah.
The power of regressive hypnosis.
Yes.
I say it as somebody who's observed quite a number over the years I worked with Bud.
Absolutely.
Can be overwhelming. And I know from my few experiences, and I waited several years till I was good and ready to do it. And I did it with outstanding practitioners on 2 occasions, Bud included, and a wonderful New York City police detective, specially trained. I was 14 again. I smelled the smells. The phrasing I used were words and phrases I would never use as an adult. And, you know, when you were speaking before about the dynamics of formations and good deductive reasoning on why we should expect to see these things and why they might have appeared in formation, I remember in the 70s, at whatever point in my development as a researcher and consuming literature, that I thought, this is, I don't know if it's a vindication or a validation, but this very first event, this very first sighting was a formation, not the same formation that my sister Helen and I had, but it was a formation. There was something in that for me. Jesse, I want to go to something that we were talking about.
May I just quickly interject?
Yes, please.
We never did see that on television, that regression with your dad, because Brian Gumbel, who was the host at the time of the Today Show, decided it was too controversial. And they nixed it. Yeah. So within days, we asked for a copy. We at least wanted the film. Oh, we already filmed over that.
Whoa!
Yeah, right. Again, it was like, even back in 1990, it was like, okay, so this is the game you're going to play with us. Okay. So
right.
And Don,
but we're going to anticipate this from now on.
How interesting that a scant dozen or maybe 13 years later, Gumbel falls in love with the subject, is brought in as the front man for the series of 3 very well-funded, very professionally done sci-fi, which I'm proud to say I initiated with the one on Rendlesham, but followed by textbook.
Well, he did well.
All of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, years later, Gumbel, who was a very effective frontman for those documentaries, has gone through something of a transformation.
Except he kept pronouncing Roswell as Roswell.
Well, I was told by locals it should be pronounced Roswell, like the from a sheep. But then I've heard other locals say, no, that's not correct.
Even from the witnesses, it was always Roswell, because that's how it's pronounced, or that's how it's spelled, Roswell.
Jesse, we were starting to talk about something that we had talked about in an earlier phone call, which I found very moving and at the same time very logical. Your father went through the fires. I mean, allegorically, actually, he was castigated. He was literally burned at the stake. He was the sacrificial individual that was always going to be associated with how could anybody be so dumb as to mistake a balloon for some spaceship from a foreign planet? This poor guy, blah, blah, blah. Your father went through something a lot more intense earlier in his life. Your grandfather, a lot more intense, which was, again, as a World War II fighter pilot, he was shot down and he was captured by the Germans and became a prisoner of war. And that became a reference point for him. Can you reflect on anything that you deduced that he said specifically to you about how that impacted on his ability to move through what he had to with this Roswell stuff?
Well, when as being a younger child, I must have been 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, and I remember my grandfather on the couch. This is in the home in Homa, and he's on the couch, short sleeve shirt, sitting there, and it's in midday, and he's literally in tears, literally having a hard time holding it together. It's like, what's going on? Everybody's like, oh, little kids, keep away or whatever. But we all ended up by going fishing. There's a bayou behind the house, and so as kids, we were lucky enough. That's a lot of time. It was some more intimate time with my grandfather on the banks of the bayou with a fishing pole, made of a bayou stick, a bamboo stick. They weren't real, but and we're talking about it, and it was like as a child, I was kind of confused. What's wrong? Did something happen? And he held a lot of weight on his shoulders from World War II. Because of being an intelligence officer, he was deeply involved with Boxcar and the dropping the bomb. And it's kind of, he even has it's a $1 bill where every member of the Boxcar signed it. And it was like a short noter. He was like, you owe us, if we make it back alive from this mission, you owe us a shot of that's gonna be an emotional show, a shot of liquor. Is how that came up together. But it was actually, he blames himself for the deaths of everybody for the Boxcar. And that again, mind you, this is many years after the 47, but that weighed on his heart and soul more than anything. It made him, it's like I said, it was that as far as what was really pressured his life, it was definitely the Second World War, above and beyond anything.
Yeah. You also said that toward the end of his life, his attitude was surprisingly positive about all this stuff and the implications. Can you just share a little bit about that relative to the way that we talked about it the other night?
Absolutely. Honestly, in nearing the end, and that kind of thing, and before then too. He thought that, what is the chances that of anybody that walks on this earth was lucky enough to be there to handle this debris and that kind of thing. So he really looked, and like I said, it might not have been continuous throughout his life. I don't know about that. Sure. But in the end, he was actually thought that he was lucky. He was, like, if I'm right, it's like being at the right place at the right time. Out of anywhere, and not to mention this could have happened anywhere on Earth, but it just happened to be in his back door, just right out of Roswell. So he actually thought he was very lucky to have been part of that historical event. He really thought, it's like it kind of put him in touch with something much bigger, that kind of thing. So definitely, and I think it really had a little bit of the same impact on my father. But it was definitely more. It was definitely not. Oh, I wish I would have never been part of that. It was no. He was proud of it, and and we've all us kids have always said the same thing. It's like they always, with us kids, is always like, this is something that's not from here.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there's a lot of details in there, but the big thing is they never changed our story. They never. It was always straightforward. My dad's story publicly was very specific, actually, in privately, very, very specific. He held to it the whole life. My grandfather, the whole thing is like they embraced it, and they, and they're same thing as they're like they're looking for that truth. They're looking for the government to acknowledge that it was real. Yes. I never quite understood that aspect of the whole thing. I thought, well, it's true. Whether your government acknowledges it, it's like, okay. But my father really wanted our government to acknowledge it before he passed, and unfortunately that didn't happen. But of course.
Thank you for that. And Shanelle, how would you compare that to your grandfather's attitude and perspective toward the end of his life?
Yeah, he did this one interview for an English company, and it's you can find it on YouTube. And he didn't really like how they portrayed him, and that was his last interview, unfortunately. But he just felt like the government was always covering it up, always lying about it, and he felt like it was his mission to find the answers. And he just it was so transcendent to him. It was technology that even a foreign government couldn't have with the world the way it was. It was just way advanced. But he believed it was spiritual. Every experience he had seeing flying saucers was spiritual for him,
Mm.
and he believed there the connection between the living and the dead, and that's just like our family belief. Um,
That's so interesting to me in kind of a symbolic way, because here we are at this profound moment in the subject having risen to a level of public discourse in the media, in the halls of power, on the internet, friends, neighbors, family, that it never had before, with ridicule falling away in a seemingly more open time. But I think a lot of that is a kabuki play where it's stage managed, and the seeming more open is more active than the actual openness. But that one of these seminal figures had basically a more ethereal perspective, and the other a more nuts and bolts perspective. And here we are, Don, where arguments are raging and factions are growing stronger. Two major fields of play: those who see, welcome the Space Brothers, they're here to help us, this is all good, anybody associated with the government can't be trusted. And at the same time, people in earnest, with, I think, good motivations, seeing that we need to approach this in an analytical way, whereby we can bring on more people from the academic world, from the world of what I'll call official science, major figures worthy of respect in the media on both sides of the aisle, as well as elected officials. And they're not, these areas of factionalism are not getting smaller. In fact, I think it's fair to say, and it's one of the reasons why so much of the conflict right now seems supercilious, that we're dealing with a myriad of explanations. And in the terms of the ones that are actual life forms, as opposed to other explanations for UFO phenomena, who knows how many civilizations, kinds of beings, groups, and all of their motivations or relationships with humanity, or takes on us. It's like trying to unbraid a cable. And this is something that I know you'll be dealing with and addressing twice next month in the two most major forums dealing with this subject of the year in this extraordinary 75th anniversary, namely your involvement, of course, with the Roswell UFO conference coming up on the 4th of July, long 4th of July weekend, a very special event, and then a scant week later in Denver for the International MUFON Symposium, where we'll be getting to get together again. But what an extraordinary moment this is, and how interesting that Kenneth Arnold and Major Marcel kind of emblemize these two beginnings of these factions.
But speaking of moments, just imagine if we would be having the citizens hearing in Washington today.
Somebody needs to send Steve Bassett another $1 million.
And the one thing that we wouldn't let them get away with is the fact that they're pigeonholing the subject. They're only addressing it back to 2004.
Oh, yeah.
They realize that we were all the way back to the 40s, when the sky was still very virgin, still very pristine. There were no drones. Jets and rockets were in their infancy at that time.
Mm-hmm.
There was little other alternative explanations that could apply to this new technology. And so my concern is that they're still going to use earthly technology as a fallback. That's why they're limited to strictly the last 20 years. Okay. Now, we can't let them get away with this. And the problem is, presently, the typical spokespeople for the subject know nothing of the history. They're the upstarts. They're people that they're film producers, and they're someone who maybe already has all their answers, so they would claim. But to me, that's the ultimate human arrogance. The idea is like Will Smith in Independence Day jumping in the cockpit and just be able to fly that thing like done in the 104.
Yeah. Kick E.T.'s butt.
Suggested that life from other planets should almost appear magical. That you're standing there and you're going, my God, how did they do that? How can they do that? And that level of wonderment and the idea that, the powers that be in Washington, that if we can control it, then we deny it. We sweep it under the carpet. We will discredit witnesses to that effect. And that genie is out of the bottle right now. They've acknowledged there's a phenomenon. There's something there. But what we have to push now are for congressional hearings that enable whistleblowers to step forward. Can you imagine Jess's dad, his grandfather, if he were still alive, having had the opportunity to testify in Washington?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I may not be able to show you a piece, but I can tell you where it went. And maybe we need to, sending people in. I mean, Bill Clinton just admitted that he sent Sandy Berger to Area 51, find out if they have the bodies there. Okay. That's how it's done. But you don't believe them when they say no. That's the problem. Because, again, that's what they are instructed to say. We have to always remember that, and I keep reminding people in the media, whenever you speak to someone in the government / military, you're always speaking to someone who is highly compartmentalized.
Right.
They only know what they know.
And what they need to know.
And what they need to know. And that's the advantage you and I have, Peter, and I would have added certainly Jess and Shanelle as well. We can come at this from every angle, every direction.
Yeah.
We're not restricted. We're not limited. And that's the mistake that the media is falling right into this same, shell game. We're only talking to people that give us the answers that we want or that we're looking for. We need to take this back to the 1940s where it all began. And I don't want to do that because it would open up the biggest granddaddy of all UFO cases, that being Roswell.
Yeah. Also to understand that no matter how open things seem to be, and it is terribly exciting on the surface that starting a relatively short period of time ago, a report was issued that acknowledged that the Pentagon now took the subject relatively seriously. Wow, light year difference. Let's bring out, the celebratory flags. But in fact, you can bet as much as you want that more exotic aspects of this subject will be fought tooth and nail to even be referred to even go on the record, to even have a presence in this dialogue. UFO abductions, crashes and retrievals, hybrids, actual cover-ups, threats, stories that are so never better documented than by Don and Tom Carey in their remarkable series of books. Kevin Randall as well. But how can I say? Witness to Roswell and the Children of Roswell, for me, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on the most recent edition, Don, when I see you next month, these are seminal works that every American should read. Everybody in the world should read them because they're such well-documented human accounts. And for those people that say, well, we really can't trust witness accounts. And I hear this trotted out regularly by folks who should know better. When there's a car crash, everybody remembers something a little differently. Yeah, but they remember it.
Right.
And the differences can be relatively minor.
And you're out of business then.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that
as far as the entire judicial system, as far as that everyone is, afforded due process. If eyewitnesses don't matter, sorry, that's all history is based on.
Yeah.
Some of the best moments, and I mean, when I say best, I mean most impacting, most memorable, most moving, and most believable memories I have of more UFO conferences than I can count, attending over 40 years now, are ones where Don and Tom spoke, but with some of these individuals on stage or accessible, in the common room where we could sit and talk with them. Most of them, a good number of them, gone now. When I spoke to them, the ones that I've had was lucky enough to be introduced by you and Tom to, many of them were already in their 80s. And you hear one after the other, and you understand these people are not interested in being on television.
No.
They don't want a cent.
No.
They're not looking for fame and glory. They want to have their account on record before they die. That simple.
Just
These
imagine,
things have determined how their lives have gone.
just imagine the case of Frankie Rowe. Father was a crew chief with the Roswell Fire Department. And for no other reason than she handled a piece of the memory material, and that she has the military come to their very home and threaten them. And she lives as far as with that level of fear and intimidation all those years. And then for the first number of years that she talked about this, she couldn't help but break down. She always did it as far as she would weep about how they threatened to kill them, that they would take them out in the desert. They'd never see their parents again. And she calls me on a Sunday afternoon. This was just 2 years before she died. And she says, I just did something probably very stupid. A gentleman called up, said he was on his way back to Arizona, and he wanted to stop by. And I told him it would be okay. Well, I assured her that let's find out who it is. I'm sure they're not going to hurt you in any way at this point. What, at your age, why would they even, they want to meet you. Let's see who it is. And the gentleman pulls up, Frankie very coyly, she opens the door, and he's standing there. And he happens to be the very son of the officer who threatened her back in 1947. His dad is long gone, and he introduces himself, and from behind his back, he pulls out a bouquet of flowers, hands it to Frankie, and says, if my father were still alive, he would want you to have these. So it's like, what possesses again, over a damn weather balloon? It's like, stop it.
Right.
Stop it. Again, you're not relevant. You provide nothing of any intellect. That argument was already shut down. Why they've had to come up with 4 explanations to begin with. 4. It's like, take your pick. No, I'll take the one that all the witnesses stand by, and that's the flying saucer. Peter, I lost your audio.
I can't hear him. I can hear you. Oh,
okay.
There we go.
I'm actually moving my mouth and words are coming out now. We bring the show to an end now. I can't thank you enough, Shanelle Schanz, Jesse Marcel, dear friend Don Schmitt, for this time. Remember what we've talked about here on Friday, 24th of June, and on July 2nd. Important anniversaries coming up. Otherwise, if you've enjoyed the show, please tell your friends. See you next week. Stay well. Stand up for what you believe in. And whenever possible, be kind to each other.